Most folks in Elk Ridge didn't talk much about Jackson Wyatt. On the rare occasion his name came up, usually over cheap coffee at the Rusty Spur Diner, people exchanged uneasy glances, lowering their voices as if the trees themselves were listening. There was a story behind those hushed tones, but no one knew the whole of it except Jackson, and he'd long since stopped telling it, even to himself. His world had shrunk to a battered, moss-covered cabin pushed up against the edge of the Colorado wilderness, a stone's throw from the tree line where the real wild began. Most nights, wind howled through the crooked pines, rattling the warped shutters and threatening to tear the roof clear off. Jackson almost wished it would. Maybe then the past would scatter with the debris, lost among the peaks and valleys. Isolation suited him, or at least that's what he told himself. The days bled together in a rhythm of survival. Split wood, check traps, patch the leaky roof, and always, always take care of Maverick. The Mustang stallion, gray-dappled coat marked by a thick, jagged scar along his flank, was the only companion Jackson had let get close in years. The horse moved with a kind of watchful pride, ears flicking back to catch every sound, dark eyes always tracking Jackson's movements. If there was trust left in Jackson's battered heart, it belonged to Maverick. Their bond had been forged in fire, or something close to it. Years before, Jackson found Maverick tangled in barbed wire during a late autumn blizzard, half-starved, wild-eyed, but too exhausted to fight. He'd spent hours in the snow, his own fingers numb, coaxing the stallion free, binding the wounds as best he could with rags and murmured promises. Since that day, Maverick had never strayed far from Jackson's side, as if he recognized a fellow survivor. Evenings stretched long in the cabin, the silence broken only by the hiss of the wood stove and the distant howl of coyotes. Sometimes, when the pain in his leg flared or his mind wandered back to far-off places, dusty roads lined with burning vehicles, the thunder of helicopters overhead, Jackson would grip the edge of the table until his knuckles blanched, eyes locked on Maverick's steady presence through the frosted window. The horse seemed to anchor him, pulling him back from the brink when memories threatened to drag him under. It was on such a night, after a sleepless bout of tossing and turning, that Jackson found an envelope wedged under his door. He didn't recall hearing anyone approach, but the boot prints in the mud suggested someone from town had made the trek. He stared at the fancy script on the front, Jackson Wyatt, for several minutes, his breath fogging the glass, heart thrumming with old, nervous energy. He ripped the seal with a pocket knife, calloused fingers clumsy with tension. The letter was brief, formal, and heavy with implication. His estranged uncle, Raymond Wyatt, had passed away. The family, such as it was, planned to gather in town for the reading of the will. Attendance was expected. Jackson's first reaction was to toss the letter in the fire. Raymond had never shown him kindness. The few childhood memories he had were marred by the man's gruff voice and colder stare. Family, if that's what you called them, had scattered after his parents died, leaving Jackson to drift between foster homes until the Army gave him a new kind of belonging. Now, after years of silence, they wanted him back, if only to claim the scraps of a dead man's estate. He crumpled the letter, tossing it on the rickety table, jaw tight with resentment. That night, sleep refused to come. Instead, he lay awake, listening to the steady snort and stamp of Maverick outside the window. The horse seemed restless, pacing in the moonlight, as if sensing Jackson's unease. The next morning, as mist curled over the meadow and sun spilled gold across the frost-bitten grass, Maverick pressed his muzzle against Jackson's shoulder, insistent and gentle. For a moment, Jackson considered ignoring the summons, letting the world turn without him. But something in the horse's eyes, steadfast, patient, urged him to reconsider. Maybe it was time to face the ghosts, if only to lay them to rest. He saddled Maverick with practiced hands, the leather creaking beneath his weight. The ride into Elk Ridge was a journey through memory as much as distance. Past the half-frozen creek where he once fished with his father, over the ridge where he'd hidden as a child to escape Raymond's temper. The air smelled of pine sap and coming snow, a bitter edge to the wind. As they approached town, heads turned, whispers followed his passage. Some faces wore pity, others suspicion. Jackson met none of their eyes, focusing instead on the warmth of Maverick's body, the steady rhythm of hooves on hard-packed earth. By the time he tied Maverick outside the lawyer's office, Jackson's nerves buzzed with old wounds and fresh dread. The horse nickered softly, bumping Jackson's shoulder as if to say, "You're not alone." Jackson drew a deep breath, squared his shoulders, and stepped inside, into the waiting jaws of family and whatever judgment the past still had left for him. Unbeknownst to him, Maverick watched the door long after it closed, nostrils flaring at the scent of trouble, ears flicked back, muscles tensed. Both man and Mustang sensed it. Change was coming, whether they were ready or not. Jackson Wyatt didn't want to be there, but he knew better than to show weakness. He strode into the lawyer's office, boots thudding on the scuffed hardwood, a cold draft trailing in behind him. The room was smaller than he remembered, crowded with the scent of stale coffee and nervous anticipation. Family he hadn't seen in years filled every chair, their faces turned sharp with suspicion, greed, and thinly veiled disdain. Even in this moment of loss, the air was thick with competition. At the center of it all sat Trevor Wyatt, his cousin, smirking in a designer suit that looked out of place in rural Colorado. Trevor had always been Raymond's favorite, the golden child who walked through life as if the world owed him its best. His hair was slicked back, and his laughter cut through the room as easily as a knife. He barely acknowledged Jackson's arrival, a deliberate slight. The others, equally eager to ignore the damaged veteran, shifted uncomfortably in their seats, whispering behind their hands. Ms. Garland, Raymond's longtime attorney, presided over the meeting with a somber air. She cleared her throat and unfolded the thick legal document, reading in a voice that quivered between formality and something like regret. The room held its collective breath, each person already imagining what they'd buy, what debts they'd pay, what dreams they'd finally achieve, at someone else's expense. It was all so predictable. The house, the bank accounts, the prized antique rifles, each piece of Raymond's life went to Trevor. The room buzzed with satisfaction, Trevor's smile stretching wider with every item. Then Ms. Garland's tone changed, tightening as she reached the end. "To my nephew, Jackson Wyatt, I leave—" She paused, eyes flicking to Jackson, her gaze apologetic. "This old iron horseshoe, the one from my Mustang, Shadow." A ripple of laughter broke out. Trevor's was the loudest. "A horseshoe? That's fitting for a charity case." The words stung, but Jackson refused to react. Instead, he stared at the object Ms. Garland held out to him, a battered, pitted relic, its surface dulled by time. The weight of humiliation pressed down on him, heavier than any burden he'd carried on the battlefield. The rest of the family averted their eyes, eager to move on. Trevor strutted about the room, shaking hands and accepting congratulations as if he'd won a contest. Ms. Garland, watching the proceedings with a wary eye, motioned for Jackson to stay behind as the crowd trickled out. The lawyer's office, once noisy with false affection, grew silent. Jackson turned the horseshoe over in his hands, feeling the rough edges, tracing the old nail holes with his thumb. Without warning, Ms. Garland slid a folded slip of paper across the table. "Your uncle left this for you. It isn't part of the official will." Her voice was barely above a whisper. "Raymond's true gift is not on paper." Before Jackson could ask, she gathered her briefcase and disappeared through a side door. Stepping outside into the pale afternoon light, Jackson fought back a surge of bitterness. He could hear Trevor's voice carrying from across the street, mocking him for all to hear. The town hadn't changed. The people here would always see him as broken, as less than. He untied Maverick from the hitching post, running a hand down the horse's neck to steady himself. Maverick, ever sensitive to Jackson's moods, nudged his arm and let out a low snort. It was comfort. Quiet. Real. Unspoken. Jackson slipped the mysterious map from his pocket, unfolding it with shaking fingers. The paper was creased and yellowed, the ink faded but still legible. A rough sketch of the surrounding mountains stretched across the page, marked with strange symbols and a series of winding trails. In one corner, a curious emblem, a horseshoe, was drawn in dark ink, almost identical to the one in his hand. Something clicked. Turning the old horseshoe over, Jackson spotted a faint engraving on the back, a mark that matched the map's emblem perfectly. He ran his thumb across it, feeling a cold thrill snake up his spine. For the first time since the funeral, hope flickered through the numbness. Trevor's laughter echoed behind him as Jackson swung up into the saddle. "Don't spend it all in one place," someone jeered. He ignored them, urging Maverick forward, desperate to escape the town and its small-minded cruelty. The Mustang's hooves struck the ground with renewed purpose, the bond between man and horse growing stronger with every stride. They left the chaos of Elk Ridge behind, heading toward the wild hills that cradled the valley. In the growing shadows, Jackson studied the map again, its secrets begging to be unraveled. As the sun dipped below the peaks, painting the sky in fire and gold, Maverick tossed his head and snorted, pawing at the earth. The horseshoe, though ancient and battered, suddenly felt impossibly heavy, less a curse, more a promise. Jackson tucked the map inside his jacket and rode on, Maverick's steady pace the only constant in a world that seemed determined to keep him out. He didn't know what lay ahead, or why Raymond had chosen him for this strange inheritance. All he knew was that something awaited him in those mountains, something more valuable than money or land. As the sky darkened and the air chilled, Jackson pressed on, his heart beating with a mix of dread and anticipation. Whatever Raymond had hidden, whatever secrets the old horseshoe held, Jackson was determined to find them, even if it meant facing dangers far greater than the ones behind him. The world beyond Elk Ridge pressed in around Jackson Wyatt and his steadfast Mustang as they crossed the invisible line between civilization and wilderness. The dirt road faded quickly behind them, swallowed by scrub and the thick shadow of the pines. The only sound was Maverick's rhythmic breathing and the occasional jingle of the battered iron horseshoe, now secured to Jackson's saddlebag, cold and weighty as a stone. Back in the solitude of his cabin, Jackson spread out the map on the rough-hewn table, letting the evening sun slant across the faded lines and mysterious symbols. The mark on the horseshoe matched the one drawn on the map's far edge, a horseshoe stamped inside a circle of peaks. Jackson's pulse quickened as he realized this was no idle bequest or cryptic message. It was a trailhead, an invitation or perhaps a challenge. The air was thick with questions and the scent of pine resin. Morning found him awake before dawn, packing supplies into saddlebags. Jerky, a battered canteen, flint, his father's old hunting knife. Maverick stamped and tossed his head as if sensing the gravity of the moment. The stallion's presence was calming, a living reminder that Jackson wasn't truly alone. Not here. Not with the cold mountain wind whispering through the aspens. Together, they set off, following the map's lines into the unknown. The first stretch was deceptively gentle. Meadows dusted with wildflowers, deer trails snaking through the grass. But as the hours passed, the path narrowed and twisted upward, turning rocky and treacherous. The mountains, blue and imposing, loomed ever closer, their crowns veiled in cloud. The forest thickened, pressing close on either side, muffling sound, making the world feel smaller and wilder. At midday, the weather turned. Clouds boiled up from the west, dark and threatening, and a sudden wind sent branches swaying. Maverick's ears flattened. Jackson squinted against the sting of grit and rain. The first drops fell cold and sharp, soaking his jacket, turning the ground to slick mud. The trail skirted a high ridge, the ground dropping away in a dizzying tumble of stone and brush. One false step and horse and rider would vanish into the abyss. Jackson's muscles ached from tension, every nerve screaming as he nudged Maverick along the cliff's edge. Lightning flashed somewhere distant. A hawk circled overhead, wings black against the gray sky. The world shrank to a narrow track of wet stone and the powerful muscles beneath the saddle. Maverick moved cautiously, hooves steady, nostrils flared. More than once, Jackson wondered if the Mustang remembered harder trails from his days in the wild. Days when survival depended on instinct, not reason. A sudden rumble jolted them as a landslide let loose above, a cascade of rock and dirt tumbling across the path. Maverick jerked back, barely dodging the debris. Jackson's heart hammered as he hauled on the reins, feeling the horse shift its weight, planting its hooves with uncanny precision. For a split second, the world held its breath as pebbles bounced past his boots, vanishing into the gorge below. Then, silence, broken only by the ragged rush of Jackson's breath. With Maverick's experience guiding them, they found a way past the rubble, skirting the broken path. The Mustang paused just beyond, sides heaving, eyes wide and wild. Jackson stroked the powerful neck, murmuring gratitude, letting his hand rest on the scar that had never fully healed. Trust, hard-won and fragile, held them together as they pressed on. Night came quickly in the mountains, shadows pooling beneath the trees. Jackson built a small fire, the flames battling the wind, the warmth little comfort against the vastness of the wilderness. He leaned against Maverick's shoulder, staring into the darkness, his mind churning with old fears. Somewhere beyond the glow, coyotes yipped, their voices high and haunting. Jackson wrapped his coat tighter, forcing himself to stay alert, to hold on. By dawn, the storm had passed, leaving the world washed clean and cold. The air crackled with frost, and a thin mist curled between the trees. Jackson consulted the map, finding a faded trail that matched their surroundings. Maverick moved with renewed purpose, his hooves crunching over ice-crusted leaves. The way forward led through a dense stand of spruce, the trunks crowding close, the sky almost hidden by green needles. Hours later, they reached a narrow ravine, the map's secret symbol looming ever larger in Jackson's mind. At its head stood a gate of black iron, ancient and imposing, hidden deep among the trees. Ivy curled along the bars, leaves glinting in the filtered sunlight. Jackson's heart thudded as he dismounted, leading Maverick closer, feeling the horseshoe in his pocket grow heavier with each step. The gate was no ordinary barrier. It was adorned with intricate carvings, faded words worn smooth by time. At its center, a lock shaped like a horseshoe, matching the one Raymond had left him. Jackson stood in silence, his breath misting in the cold air, the enormity of the moment pressing in. He traced the lock with trembling fingers, feeling the weight of the past, the hope of something new. Maverick pressed close, snorting softly, eyes bright with anticipation. The Mustang's faith steadied him. Jackson slipped the iron horseshoe from his pocket, fitting it into the lock. Heart pounding as the mechanism clicked into place. The gate shuddered, then swung inward with a rusty groan, revealing a hidden world beyond. Sunrise Valley, sunlit and untouched, a secret kept for generations. Jackson and Maverick stepped forward, leaving behind the burdens of the old world, stepping into the unknown, a place where destiny waited and nothing would ever be the same. Sunrise Valley didn't look real at first. As the old iron gate creaked open, Jackson Wyatt found himself blinking against the brightness, unsure if this was some fever dream conjured by exhaustion. Beyond the gate, the land spread out like a hidden paradise, a wide, sun-dappled basin ringed by mountains, wildflower meadows sloping down to a winding creek. Smoke curled from a scattering of tidy chimneys. Fenced pastures held grazing horses, and everywhere the air buzzed with a quiet energy, the kind Jackson hadn't felt in years. Maverick's ears perked up, nostrils flaring as the Mustang took in the scents of grass, running water, and other horses. For the first time since leaving the cabin, the tension in Jackson's shoulders eased. The valley radiated peace, but it was not the sterile silence of isolation. Instead, it thrummed with life. Children's laughter, the distant thud of an axe, the bark of a dog echoing from somewhere near a barn. As Jackson and Maverick moved forward, people began to appear along the main dirt lane, women and men in work clothes, some with children holding tight to their hands, others carrying bundles of hay or buckets of feed. Faces turned with curiosity and recognition. Some seemed wary at first, but when they caught sight of Maverick, their expressions softened. The Mustang's proud gait and battered appearance drew smiles and murmurs of welcome. A gray-haired woman stepped out from the shade of a porch, wiping her hands on her apron. "You must be Jackson," she called, her voice strong, carrying over the distance. He nodded, unable to find words, the weight of his journey still pressing on his chest. "I'm Helen. Raymond told us all about you. Welcome to Sunrise Valley." She gestured for him to follow, and as he did, Jackson sensed the eyes of the whole community on him, measuring, judging, hoping. Helen led Jackson and Maverick through the settlement. The valley was more than just a refuge. It was a lifeline. Rows of tidy cabins stood along winding lanes. Community gardens overflowed with carrots and squash, their beds tended by people who moved with a purpose Jackson recognized from his own hardest days. Men repaired a fence along the southern pasture, sleeves rolled and faces tanned by sun. Older veterans sat beneath a sycamore, playing cards and trading stories. Some wore scars on their bodies, others on their faces. Everywhere Jackson looked, he saw reminders of Raymond Wyatt, his uncle's steady hand in the way the cabins were built to withstand winter storms, in the sturdy barn at the valley's center, in the respect these people seemed to hold for the land and each other. Maverick became an instant favorite with the children, who rushed from behind fences to watch him pass, their eyes wide with awe. One bold girl reached out to stroke Maverick's muzzle, giggling as the Mustang snorted and shook his mane. Helen explained as they walked that Sunrise Valley was founded by Raymond after he returned from his own battles, first in war, then against the bitterness and loneliness that followed. The valley was meant as a place where broken soldiers and their families could heal, where they could rebuild their lives without judgment. The stories came in pieces. A veteran learning to walk again after an injury, a widow who found hope in working the land, a teenager finally safe from the chaos that had followed her father home from war. Jackson was ushered to a cabin near the edge of the creek, where the door hung open in invitation, and the walls were hung with old photographs, some of Raymond as a young man, others showing community gatherings in the valley across the years. He stood at the threshold, feeling both welcome and out of place. He'd grown used to the idea that he was alone in the world, a burden or a ghost. Here, among people who'd suffered and survived, the possibility of belonging stirred something deep inside. The days blurred together as Jackson settled in. He spent mornings helping with chores, fixing fences, mending roofs, learning the names of the people who called Sunrise Valley home. Maverick, once wary of strangers, found joy among the children. The stallion became a legend in his own right, leading group rides across the meadows, teaching nervous newcomers how to trust a horse again. The children idolized him, crafting wild stories about his battles with mountain lions and his daring escapes from thunderstorms. In the evenings, the community gathered for simple meals under the shade of the cottonwoods, sharing laughter and memories as the sun dropped behind the peaks. Jackson listened more than he spoke, but gradually, the old weight on his chest began to lift. The haunted look in his eyes faded as he learned to trust, to let others draw near. One night, as fireflies blinked over the fields and Maverick grazed contentedly nearby, Jackson walked alone along the creek, looking up at the stars. The valley felt both ancient and new, as if it had been waiting for him all along. He thought of Raymond, not with bitterness now, but gratitude, and realized that this hidden place was not just an inheritance. It was a second chance, not just for him, but for everyone who called it home. The lessons of war and loss would never fully fade, but here in Sunrise Valley, Jackson, Wyatt, and Maverick were no longer outcasts. They were a part of something larger, something built on hope, and the stubborn belief that even the deepest wounds could heal. Jackson Wyatt had never expected to feel peace again, but in the weeks that followed his arrival, Sunrise Valley worked a quiet change in him. He rose early with the other men to mend fences, learning the routines of ranch life all over again. Each evening, he would watch Maverick lead groups of children along the creek, their laughter rising above the sound of hooves and the rush of water. The stallion's presence had become a beacon in the valley, a living symbol that healing was possible, not just for the veterans who called this place home, but for anyone carrying invisible scars. Gradually, Jackson found himself opening up to the rhythms of the valley. The haunted edge in his eyes faded. He joined the communal meals, shared stories around the bonfire, and started to feel the old sense of purpose he'd lost so long ago. The people of Sunrise Valley respected him not for his past, but for the way he listened, the way he worked beside them, never complaining or shirking. He learned the names and stories of men who'd once slept in foxholes and women who'd held families together through years of silence and fear. Maverick flourished, too. No longer just Jackson's lifeline, the Mustang became the heart of the valley. He led group rides into the foothills, guided children through tangled meadows, and was the first to arrive when a calf got loose or a wagon got stuck in the mud. The children crafted garlands of wildflowers for his mane and told stories of his wild past, making him larger than life. For Jackson, watching Maverick thrive in the heart of the community brought a kind of joy he'd forgotten existed. But even in paradise, trouble finds a way in. Word of Jackson's arrival and his connection to Raymond Wyatt soon trickled out of the valley. It reached Elk Ridge, and with it, the ears of Trevor Wyatt. Greed had always been Trevor's guiding star, and the thought that Jackson might be building something of value set his ambitions alight. What truly set Trevor scheming, though, were the rumors about the land itself. It began with whispers. A geologist, hired by a mining company, passing through town and asking about the odd mineral formations around Sunrise Valley. It ended with the discovery that the valley sat atop a newly mapped vein of rare minerals, its value easily running into the millions. Suddenly, Jackson's inheritance seemed less like a cruel joke and more like a golden ticket, one Trevor was determined to claim. Trevor moved quickly, making calls to lawyers and business partners, assembling a plan to seize the land. At first, the threats were subtle. A letter suggesting that Jackson's ownership was under review, an anonymous offer to buy out the valley at a fraction of its worth. But Jackson, rooted now in the community and emboldened by the people who stood with him, refused to be intimidated. Maverick, as if sensing the rising tension, stayed close at Jackson's side, ears pricked, ready for trouble. As weeks turned to months, the threats grew bolder. Fences were cut in the night, and cattle wandered loose. Tools went missing from the sheds. Jackson and the others doubled the nightly patrols, walking the perimeter in pairs, lanterns swinging as they checked for signs of tampering. Still, the sense of unease settled over the valley like a storm cloud, darkening every conversation, every quiet moment. It was Helen, the gray-haired matriarch, who reminded everyone of why the valley existed. "This place was built by people who lost everything," she said, during a tense meeting in the big barn. "We know how to fight. We know how to hold on." The words rang in Jackson's ears as he watched the faces around him, toughened by war and hardship, but brightened now by hope. The valley had become more than a refuge. It was a home worth defending. Trevor's next move was a personal visit, driving up in a shiny SUV that looked like it belonged in a city, not on a mountain road. He strode through the gate, flanked by two men in expensive suits, and made his intentions clear. "You don't know what you're sitting on, cousin," he sneered, his eyes cold and calculating. "There's more value under this ground than you'll ever know. I'm offering you a way out. Take it, or I'll make things difficult." Jackson's answer was silence, and Maverick, standing between them, pawed the earth as if to say that the answer was final. After Trevor's visit, the valley steeled itself. People grew closer, the lines between old wounds and new friendships blurring. Maverick became more vigilant, rousing the settlement at the first sign of trouble, leading midnight rides to check the outer fences. Children stopped playing near the gates, and the older veterans took shifts guarding the barn. Still, despite the uncertainty, Jackson felt more alive than he had in years. Each challenge only bound him tighter to the valley and its people. For the first time, he realized he wasn't just surviving, he was fighting for something bigger than himself. But as autumn storms gathered over the mountains, the threat from Trevor grew ever more menacing, hinting at dangers even Maverick might not see coming. The air in Sunrise Valley turned electric as autumn deepened, the winds sharper, the clouds heavier and more ominous by the day. Jackson could sense something building, a pressure in the atmosphere that left the horses restless and the adults wary, glancing over their shoulders more often as the shadows grew longer. Maverick became even more alert, standing guard outside Jackson's cabin every night, ears swiveling, muscles taut. The tension that had simmered for weeks finally broke one night when the wind howled down from the mountains, rattling shutters and sending branches clattering across rooftops. Storms in these high passes were no stranger to the valley, but this one was different, fiercer, angrier, as if echoing the battle brewing between Jackson and Trevor. Sheets of rain hammered the cabins, thunder rolled through the valley, and flashes of lightning illuminated the barns and pastures in harsh blue light. Jackson lay awake, listening to the drumming on the tin roof, every sense on edge. Maverick paced restlessly just beyond the door, hooves thudding softly on the ground. Sometime past midnight, the Mustang's uneasy snorts turned into a loud, urgent neigh, a warning that snapped Jackson instantly alert. He threw on his boots and rushed outside, his heart hammering in his chest as Maverick met him with wild, fearful eyes. There was danger in the air, more than just the storm. Out beyond the far fields, a strange, unnatural roar rose above the wind. Jackson's gut twisted. He recognized the sound from years of living near water, rushing, relentless, and deadly. He grabbed his lantern, its feeble glow barely cutting through the rain, and sprinted toward the source. Others from the valley joined him, drawn from their beds by Maverick's alarm. Reaching the old stone bridge, Jackson caught sight of the dam upstream. Even through the downpour, something was wrong. The structure shuddered, water surging over the top in torrents. Then, with a sickening crack, part of the dam gave way, sending a violent wall of water crashing down the mountainside straight toward the heart of Sunrise Valley. Panic swept through the group as the floodwaters rushed closer. The creek, usually a peaceful ribbon through the meadows, transformed into a raging monster, tearing at its banks, uprooting fence posts and trees. Jackson and the others shouted warnings, but the noise of the flood drowned everything out. Through the chaos, Maverick darted toward a cluster of cabins on the lower ground, where the Curran family, new arrivals, unfamiliar with valley floods, were trapped. Without hesitation, Jackson vaulted onto Maverick's back, trusting the Mustang's instincts. Rain stung his face, and visibility was nearly zero as Maverick charged into the rising water. They reached the Curran cabin just as the flood slammed against the porch. The family, mother, father, two terrified kids, huddled at the door. Maverick planted himself firm in the mud, and Jackson yelled for the Currans to climb up, hoisting the youngest onto the horse's back and urging the others to grab hold. Navigating back was a nightmare. The water bit at Maverick's legs, cold and strong, threatening to pull them under. The Mustang's strength was their anchor, muscles straining against the current as he picked a path through floating debris and sucking mud. The children clung to Jackson, sobbing, while their parents struggled to keep up, swept off their feet more than once, but refusing to let go. With a final, desperate surge, Maverick hauled them to higher ground, where waiting neighbors pulled the family to safety. The storm raged until morning, leaving the valley battered but not broken. Sunrise revealed the damage: ruined crops, collapsed fences, and the dam shattered and leaking, with deep gouges in the earth at its base. But thanks to Jackson and Maverick, no lives were lost. The Currans, shaken but alive, clung to their rescuers with gratitude too deep for words. As the community gathered to assess the damage, a grim realization spread. The dam's break had not been an accident. Tracks in the mud led to a set of tire marks, and the lock on the maintenance hatch had been cut clean through. It was sabotage, deliberate and well-timed. Jackson's blood ran cold. He didn't need to see the accusing looks to know where suspicion would land. Trevor, never missing a chance to twist the knife, arrived soon after with officials in tow, parading around the damage and loudly questioning Jackson's leadership. He pointed to the ruined dam, casting doubt on Jackson's ability to protect the valley and suggesting, in front of everyone, that Jackson's supposed negligence had endangered lives. "Maybe it's time we let someone more qualified take charge," he sneered for all to hear. But the valley wasn't so easily swayed. They remembered the night's heroics, the way Jackson and Maverick risked everything to save the Currans, the way the community rallied to hold the line against the flood. Even as Trevor tried to spin the disaster into his advantage, seeds of doubt took root, but not where he expected. Some began to whisper about Trevor's timing, his sudden presence, and the suspicious circumstances. For Jackson, the battle lines had shifted. It was no longer just about land or inheritance. It was about the soul of the valley, about trust and loyalty, about proving that Sunrise Valley would stand together no matter what storms or schemes came their way. After the floodwaters receded and the valley counted its blessings and losses, life in Sunrise Valley slowly found a rhythm again. The cleanup was backbreaking, but the effort pulled the community even closer. Fences were patched, debris cleared from gardens, and every helping hand, young or old, pitched in. Jackson threw himself into the work, refusing to let Trevor's accusations fester. Yet, under the surface, the wound was real. There were still whispers among a few, seeds of doubt that Trevor was happy to nurture whenever he visited. Jackson couldn't shake the suspicion that Trevor had orchestrated the sabotage. Each time he replayed the night in his mind, it all fit too neatly. The timing, the sabotage, and Trevor's arrival just as dawn broke. Still, suspicion wasn't proof, and in the world outside, only proof mattered. As repairs progressed, Jackson spent more time in the main barn, overseeing the repairs to the tack room and helping replace rotten beams with sturdy new lumber. Maverick was never far from his side. The Mustang, sensing the strain, became his silent guardian, following Jackson from task to task, his steady presence a balm to the nerves that never quite settled. One afternoon, the children begged Jackson to let Maverick join them for a ride around the pasture. Reluctantly, Jackson agreed, watching as the Mustang, once wild and wary, allowed a circle of small hands to braid flowers into his mane. As the children ran off, Maverick lingered by the barn, ears twitching, nose low to the ground, as if searching for something unseen. As dusk deepened and the others drifted home, Jackson remained behind to finish a few last chores. Maverick, left to his own devices, circled the perimeter of the barn, sniffing at the foundation. Suddenly, the Mustang began pawing at a loose stone near the back corner of the old building, his hoof striking with insistent force. Jackson, startled by the noise, hurried over and knelt down, brushing away the dirt. What he saw beneath the stone made his breath catch, a hint of rusted metal buried beneath decades of dust. With his heart pounding, Jackson worked with his hands and a crowbar, prying the stone loose. As it rolled away, he uncovered a battered old chest, the iron bands spotted with age but still intact. For a moment, he hesitated, as if the weight of the past threatened to fall on him all at once. Maverick watched him, dark eyes wide, nostrils flaring in the cool night air. Jackson forced the lid open. Inside, he found a trove of documents, old land deeds with Raymond Wyatt's signature, bundles of yellowed correspondence, and, most astonishing of all, pages and pages of legal records, notarized statements, and photographs. The handwriting was unmistakably Raymond's, each letter sharp and careful. Jackson flipped through the papers, heart racing. There were receipts, secret letters, and, in the bottom of the chest, a sealed envelope marked with his own name. He broke the seal with trembling fingers. Inside, Raymond's handwriting explained everything. A detailed account of how Trevor, over years, had siphoned money from family accounts, falsified land transfers, and manipulated the legal paperwork after Raymond's diagnosis. The chest also included official documents, more than enough to prove beyond any doubt that Jackson was the true legal owner of Sunrise Valley, including mineral rights and all attached land. In that moment, hope and relief washed over Jackson, stronger than anything he'd felt in years. He sat in the dust beside Maverick, the Mustang's warm breath steady at his shoulder, and let the truth settle in. Everything he needed to defend the valley was here. Proof of Trevor's fraud and sabotage, the evidence to stop him once and for all. By lantern light, Jackson returned to the community hall and summoned the valley's leaders. He spread out the deeds and letters for all to see, laying bare the story Raymond had hidden for years. The effect was electric. Faces that had held suspicion now lit with relief and fierce loyalty. The whispers died, replaced by resolve. Sunrise Valley, they now understood, was rightfully Jackson's, by blood, by law, and by the wishes of Raymond himself. The days that followed were filled with new energy. Word spread through the valley, and the people rallied around Jackson, vowing to protect their home and their way of life. Maverick became a legend overnight, the horse who unearthed the proof that would save them all. The children recounted the story to anyone who'd listen, adding flourishes and wild details, but always ending with Maverick pawing the earth and Jackson lifting the lid to a future none of them had dared to hope for. Now, the fight for Sunrise Valley was no longer just Jackson's burden. It belonged to all who called the valley home, each person ready to stand beside him. In the starlit dark, Maverick and Jackson stood at the heart of the community, no longer outcasts, but leaders on the eve of a battle for the soul of the valley. As the autumn sun crested the ridge, casting Sunrise Valley in gold, a sense of anticipation buzzed through the community like electricity. The hidden evidence unearthed by Maverick and Jackson had transformed suspicion into certainty and fear into purpose. The valley was ready, no longer simply reacting to threats, but prepared to fight for itself. Word reached them early that morning. Trevor Wyatt was coming, and he wasn't alone. He arrived at the head of a convoy of black SUVs, the kind that seemed designed to announce wealth and power. With him were a small army of lawyers in crisp suits and hired security, men who didn't belong in the wild heart of Colorado, their polished shoes and expensive sunglasses out of place among the mud and mountains. They stopped just outside the open iron gate. Trevor strode ahead, brimming with arrogance, a smug grin fixed to his face. He surveyed the gathering crowd. Farmers, veterans, children, and elders alike, all united in their determination. Jackson stood at the center, the battered chest at his feet, Maverick at his side, a living wall of muscle and quiet resolve. The stallion's eyes flashed, and the children gathered behind him, hands resting on his flanks for comfort. Trevor's voice rang out, smooth and sharp, as he presented his demands to the assembled community. You're trespassing on land that's rightfully mine. I have the deeds and the legal right. I'm giving you all a chance to walk away, quietly and without a fight. His words, meant to intimidate, only hardened the crowd's resolve. The lawyers produced folders thick with paperwork, but they meant little now. Jackson, calm but firm, opened the battered chest and raised a stack of yellowed documents for all to see. The crowd parted as he stepped forward. "This is the true record of Sunrise Valley," he declared, his voice carrying across the silent fields. Deeds with Raymond's signature, notarized affidavits, original mineral rights, all meticulously preserved, and now in the hands of the rightful owner. Trevor's composure cracked as he realized his grip on the land was slipping. He shouted, called for his lawyers to intervene, but the momentum had shifted. As the valley's residents watched, Jackson laid out the story for all to hear. The manipulation, the forgeries, the sabotage. Faces in the crowd darkened with anger and disbelief, but not toward Jackson. Their fury was aimed squarely at Trevor and his entourage. The standoff intensified as Trevor, desperate and enraged, signaled his security to advance. But the townspeople, veterans standing shoulder to shoulder, moved to block their path. Helen, the community's matriarch, stepped forward beside Jackson, her eyes unblinking, unafraid. Maverick reared up, snorting and stamping the earth, a living barrier that made even the hired men hesitate. The children pressed in close behind their protectors, their faith in Maverick unwavering. Just then, as if the story of the valley had called out to the world, reporters from a regional news station rolled in, their cameras capturing the confrontation. The story of Sunrise Valley, the community for veterans, the battle for justice, the courage of those who refused to be bought, had found an audience far beyond the mountains. Microphones caught every word as Jackson read Raymond's letter, laying out the true intent behind the valley's founding and his uncle's wish for a place of healing, not profit. Trevor tried once more to shout down Jackson, threatening lawsuits and ruin. But the reporters' cameras lingered on Maverick standing between the valley's children and the men in suits, and on the faces of those who had been saved by Jackson's heroism during the flood. The narrative could not be twisted now. The truth was out, raw and undeniable. The people of Sunrise Valley closed ranks, making it clear they would not be cowed by threats or bribed by money. Some of the security men, perhaps sensing the shifting tide, backed away, unwilling to challenge a united town and the formidable Mustang at its center. The lawyers, seeing their case unravel in real time, began to retreat as well, flipping through papers with growing confusion. By sunset, Trevor's position had become untenable. The reporter's footage would soon be broadcast across the state, if not the nation. The evidence from Raymond's chest was already in the hands of local authorities, and the community, more united than ever, refused to yield. Trevor, surrounded but utterly alone, could only watch as everything he schemed for slipped through his fingers. The valley exhaled as the last car pulled away, the tension broken, replaced by exhausted relief. Maverick stood tall beside Jackson, his mane tousled by the wind, as children and neighbors gathered to thank them both. There would be battles yet to come, in courtrooms perhaps, and in the public eye. But Sunrise Valley had reclaimed its soul. The showdown had revealed the true heart of the community, not in land or minerals, but in the people and the Mustang who refused to let greed destroy what Raymond had built. Night fell, and the fires of celebration lit the valley. Jackson looked up at the stars, Maverick's steady presence at his side, knowing the real fight was won not by law or money, but by the courage to stand together. Sunrise Valley was theirs, now and for generations to come. In the days after the confrontation, Sunrise Valley found itself thrust into an unfamiliar spotlight. Word of the community's struggle spread quickly beyond the local news. Soon, reporters camped at the valley's entrance, their vans and cameras now a part of the landscape. They wanted the story of the hidden valley for wounded veterans, the greedy heir, and the outcast soldier who'd become a hero. Jackson didn't much care for the attention, but he understood its power. The world was watching now, and the truth couldn't be swept aside. Trevor Wyatt, exposed but never one to surrender quietly, unleashed his legal team. Lawsuits and countersuits flooded the county courthouse, each one more desperate than the last. Yet for every move he made, Jackson and the Valley answered with the evidence Maverick had uncovered. The deeds, letters, and most damning of all, the documentation of Trevor's fraud and sabotage. For the first time in his life, Trevor's name inspired more suspicion than respect. His allies in Elk Ridge began to back away, their loyalty outmatched by the threat of public disgrace. Court proceedings began under a pall of anticipation. The old courthouse overflowed with townsfolk, valley residents, and media from across the state. Jackson stood at the front of it all, Maverick's steady presence outside a comfort he could feel even through the stone walls. Helen sat beside Jackson, her gaze steely, her faith unwavering. The judge, known for his no-nonsense approach, wasted little time. Witness after witness took the stand. Veterans who spoke of the home they'd found in Sunrise Valley, parents who recounted how their children learned to trust again, and the Curran family, still shaken from the flood, who described how Jackson and Maverick had saved their lives. For every accusation Trevor's lawyers hurled, the Valley offered facts and first-hand accounts. The stolen funds, the tampered dam, the attempted frame-up, all laid bare, piece by piece, in front of a rapt audience. Trevor's team tried to discredit Jackson, digging up details from his military record, suggesting his trauma made him unfit. But the Valley's residents countered with stories of Jackson's leadership, his calm in disaster, his sacrifice for others. The reporters, always hungry for a new angle, found themselves drawn less to Trevor's drama and more to Jackson's quiet dignity and the Mustang who never left his side. Each night, the Valley watched the news as their story unfolded in living rooms across the country. Strangers wrote letters of support. Donations arrived for repairs, supplies, even legal bills. When Maverick's role in the discovery of the chest became public, the Mustang was celebrated as a hero in his own right. Reporters snapped photos of him with the children, his mane adorned with braids and ribbons, his steady gaze capturing hearts. Maverick, who once trusted only Jackson, now allowed the Valley's kids to lead him around the pasture. Never far from sight, when Jackson needed a moment of quiet among the trees, the trial reached its climax with Jackson's own testimony. He spoke not just of the events, the sabotage, the night of the flood, the years of loneliness, but of what Sunrise Valley meant. A place for people who'd lost too much, who needed a home and a second chance. He spoke of Raymond's vision and how the Valley was built not on wealth, but on the belief that wounded people could heal together. The judge listened, taking careful notes. The final day of testimony brought a stillness to the courtroom, broken only by the shuffle of papers and the ticking of an old clock. When the verdict came, it landed like thunder. The court ruled in Jackson's favor. Sunrise Valley, with all its land and mineral rights, belonged to him and the community. Trevor's actions, fraud, sabotage, reckless endangerment, were entered into the record. An investigation into his corporate dealings was ordered. Trevor, pale and beaten, was escorted out under the harsh glare of the cameras. The story of his fall from grace made headlines. For years he had played the part of the favored son. Now he would be remembered for his greed and deceit. Jackson, by contrast, found his name synonymous with hope and justice. The community he had once feared to join now embraced him as its true leader. Sunrise Valley's victory was celebrated with a gathering unlike any before. Under strings of lanterns and a sky pricked with stars, the people feasted and laughed. Children reenacted Maverick's legendary discovery, staging mock trials and dramatic rescues. Veterans who had once avoided the spotlight stood tall, their burdens lighter. But for Jackson, the greatest relief was the knowledge that the valley would endure, not just as a sanctuary for those who needed healing, but as a living testament to Raymond's legacy and the spirit of all who called it home. Maverick stood at his side, sharing in the joy and the peace that, at last, seemed within reach. Sunrise Valley, once a hidden refuge, had become a symbol, a place where justice was won not by force, but by truth, courage, and the strength found in standing together. Morning broke over Sunrise Valley, painting the land in soft gold and cool blue. The air was sweet and alive after weeks of tension, filled now with the rhythm of new beginnings. With the courts ruling behind them and Trevor's shadow finally lifted, the valley settled into a peace it hadn't known in years. Yet this was not the peace of retreat or quiet desperation. It was the triumphant quiet that follows a hard-won battle, the sense that the future was theirs to shape. Jackson Wyatt awoke before dawn, as he always did, but for the first time in decades, his mind was unburdened by the weight of old wounds. Instead, he felt purpose thrumming in his chest, a certainty that the valley was his to protect, not as a lone outcast, but as a leader of something greater. He walked out into the morning mist, Maverick trailing close behind, the stallion's coat gleaming in the early light. Preparations were already underway for a celebration that would bring together not just the valley's residents, but friends and supporters from across the region. The parade would mark the beginning of a new chapter, a living testament to the dream Raymond Wyatt had entrusted to his nephew. Banners hung from porches. Horses and riders gathered in the meadows, while the community's children wove garlands of wildflowers, giggling as they draped them over Maverick's mane. Helen greeted Jackson with a knowing smile. She was already directing the final preparations for the day, organizing volunteers, calming nerves, and making sure no one was left out. The valley buzzed with anticipation, not of danger, but of shared joy. For Jackson, it was still strange to feel so at home among these people. Strange, but right. By noon, guests arrived from all corners. Veterans who had once passed through the valley, families from Elk Ridge, state officials drawn by the news coverage, even a few of the reporters who had helped shine a light on the valley's struggle. They were welcomed with open arms and hot food, stories traded over steaming mugs of coffee beneath the tall cottonwoods. As the parade began, Jackson and Maverick took their place at the front, leading a procession of Mustangs and riders, children waving homemade flags, and old soldiers marching with heads held high. The parade wound through the open iron gates, now decorated with garlands, and across the green pastures that had nearly been lost to greed and lies. Laughter echoed, and applause rose from the crowd as Maverick danced and pranced, the hero of so many valley legends. His story was told and retold, how he had saved the Curran family from the flood, unearthed the chest that proved the valley's true ownership, and stood between the people and the threats of the outside world. At the heart of the valley, a stage was set for speeches and music. Helen spoke first, her words both fierce and gentle, honoring Raymond's vision and the strength of those who made it real. Then Jackson took the stage, his hands steady, his eyes clear. He spoke of belonging, not just to the land, but to each other. He shared his gratitude for a place where wounded hearts could heal, where even the most broken could find purpose again. His voice, once so often lost to silence, now carried with conviction, reaching neighbors, friends, and strangers alike. The day's celebration stretched into evening. Lanterns glowed as the sky deepened into purple, and a bonfire crackled at the center of it all. There was music, fiddles and guitars, the stomp of boots, the laughter of children. Veterans swapped stories beneath the stars, some for the first time letting go of memories that had haunted them. The bonds of the community, once tentative, had become unbreakable. In the quiet after the celebration, Jackson sat on the porch of his cabin, Maverick grazing nearby. He thought of his uncle Raymond, of the hardships and battles that had shaped them both. He understood now what Raymond had meant to leave behind. Not wealth or land, but a place where hope could take root, where every scar was understood and accepted, where the future belonged to those willing to fight for it together. Plans were already underway to turn Sunrise Valley into a national foundation for struggling veterans and their families, a legacy that would reach far beyond the mountains. Volunteers arrived weekly, bringing supplies and skills. The valley's story inspired donations from across the country. Each time a new family arrived, Jackson greeted them at the gate, offering not just a home, but a second chance. Maverick remained at the heart of it all. Children still braided flowers into his mane and whispered secrets into his ear. Older residents found comfort in his steady gaze, and newcomers quickly learned to trust the Mustang as they trusted Jackson. Together, they had become a symbol, not just of survival, but of hope, resilience, and the possibility of renewal. The seasons turned, wildflowers returned to the meadows, and the creek, once swollen with floodwaters, now sang its quiet song. Sunrise Valley thrived, no longer hidden, but known and celebrated. Jackson often walked the boundary at dusk, watching as the lights of the community glimmered in the darkness. He knew now that his journey had not been for nothing, that every trial and loss had brought him to this place. In the end, true wealth was not in the mineral veins beneath the soil, nor in the deeds and titles that proved ownership. It was found in the laughter around the bonfire, the quiet moments between man and horse, the sense of belonging that endured through every hardship. It was found in the faces of those who'd found sanctuary and in the spirit of a Mustang who refused to give up. As the valley settled into another peaceful night, Jackson, Wyatt, and Maverick stood at the open gate, looking out over the land that was now theirs, not as outcasts, but as founders of something greater. And in the stillness, with the stars bright above, it was clear that the legacy of Sunrise Valley would last for generations, a testament to courage, community, and the unbreakable bond between a man and his Mustang.